times the rate at which you arrest whites. How can law enforcement and that mission be respected? It's not. And it leads to this horrible policing and violations and excess force and the 391 program, I believe, is where the Pentagon delivers its tanks to local law enforcement so we can have episodes like we saw in Ferguson
yes.
Just a while ago.
Yes, absolutely. Now, in terms of talking about this, in terms of talking even about the legal authority for this, I think it's set up a real interesting case, these state initiatives, these laws that have legalized the recreational use of marijuana. I think that sets up a very interesting case, and as a former prosecutor and lawyer, I'd like to get your take on it, because we've got now states that have said, in violation of what the federal government has been saying for 40 years, they said, no, we're not going to arrest people who are recreationally using marijuana. And you've got the feds pushing back on it. You've got some states in particular, Oklahoma and Nebraska, are asking the Supreme Court to weigh in and use the supremacy clause in a way that I think is not valid. I think we had two amendments in the Constitution, the 9th and 10th Amendment, that made it pretty clear that unless the power was explicitly given to the federal government to regulate something, they didn't have that power. It was reserved to the people in the states. And I think that was recognized in the 18th Amendment and the 21st Amendment, where they prohibited alcohol. They said they needed to have a constitutional amendment because they didn't have that inherent power under some supremacy clause, and then had to have another amendment to take that out. So how do you see this playing out legally within the United States? Because while you're going to the United Nations, the source of where this agenda has come, and trying to change the approach there, you've got people in the states who are saying, we're going to exercise our 10th Amendment rights and we're not going to send people to prison, while other states are trying to appeal this to the Supreme Court. How do you see this shaking out legally?
Well, I think it's wonderful that we've got these referendums that are passing, where the people themselves are saying that our drug laws are so bad that we are going to defy federal law and we are going to legalize, for example, cannabis. Cannabis, people know for a long time, is a medicine, yet the federal government under its laws says it's not a medicine. Well, we got little kids with seizures multiple times a day that can be helped with cannabis, but we've outlawed it. Mm-hmm. So the dichotomy between federal and state law is a long-time historical part of our government in the United States. And the president has been wise enough to recognize where the people themselves, exercising their authority under state law, they legalize a substance. We're not going to use federal resources to come in and imprison or try and trump local state law. That's at least a step in the correct direction. I see this playing out with the war on drugs coming to a quick conclusion because the people realize it doesn't work. Yes. The difficulty is law enforcement and parents and teachers and responsible people, drug treaters, are some of the most difficult people to convince. Yeah. Even though if you ask somebody, does the war on drugs work? I mean, you're going to get at least 9 out of 10 that are going to say absolutely not.
Yes.
But it's a harder question to convince somebody to use their head and recognize that these things are too dangerous to leave uncontrolled.
Yes.
From the beginning of time, people have used illicit substances, and they're going to the end of time. So rather than criminalize and harass a world of people, let's control and regulate drugs and try to reduce the harm, reduce the number of people incarcerated, stop rewarding police for getting one person to rat on another person instead of relying on the golden rule that we once upon a time used.
Oh, absolutely. It's just corrupted us in so many different ways systemically, and I'm hoping that people are going to stand up at the state level, assert their 10th Amendment rights, stand for their individual rights as human beings, support each other in juries, not convict each other. We've had a lot of cases of jury nullification of people who were charged with possessing large amounts of marijuana, and they had the jurors let them go.
We now have executive nullification in effect. Yes. Where things are so bad, the Attorney General, Eric Holder, is saying U.S. attorneys don't charge people with these drug crimes that have mandatory minimums where we got to send them away forever in a nonviolent drug offense.
Well, as you pointed out, it's an information war. It's something we have to convince. A lot of people who are in responsible positions just cannot see even the precedent that we had with our failed experiment with prohibition at the beginning of last century. And so now we're doomed to repeat it again, even though it's been failing now for close to 50 years. Thank you so much, Jim Gierach, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I wish you the best in taking it to the source of the drug war, to the United Nations. I thank you for speaking truth to power, and I hope you are successful in getting them to change their priorities at that level.
David, thank you for letting LEAP bring this message to you and your listeners.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, it's very important for people to go to the United Nations like Jim Gierach is doing. Make the case that we need to approach this differently, not as a law enforcement problem, but as a drug addiction problem. Still, we need to understand that we have the rights under the 9th and 10th Amendment to make these decisions at the state level and even at the individual level with our juries. We need to understand that there was no constitutional authority and there remains no constitutional authority to prohibit anything. That's why we had the 18th and the 21st Amendments, because everybody 100 years ago understood that those powers were not possessed by the federal government. So they're not something that can be turned over to a treaty. But as Jim points out, it's not being enforced by the UN. The UN is just a collection of nations who are saying, well, we all agreed that we're going to run this drug prohibition war. So you're part of the club, do it. And they say, oh, don't twist my arm behind my back, because it's a very effective way for governments to control the population. And we know how involved our government is on both sides of the war on drugs, both as a prosecutor and as a supplier. Well, that's it for tonight. If you are watching us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're not a Prison Planet TV subscriber, please consider becoming a subscriber and financially supporting our operation. Your contribution, your membership, your subscription will allow you to watch the news every weeknight as it happens, and it will also give you and 20 people access to all of Alex Jones's documentaries. Well, that's it for tonight. Please join us again tomorrow night at 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern.
From the water table to our soils to the atmosphere itself, our world is becoming more and more toxic each and every day. But it's not just the air outside that's toxic. Indoor air has been shown to have 2 to 5 times higher concentrations of pollutants than even outdoor air. And most Americans spend 90% of their time inside using toxic chemicals within their homes. There are more than 42 million smokers in the United States. Well over 1,000 types of mold and mildew linked to numerous conditions. And don't forget the fact that 6 million Americans live with pets they're allergic to as well. When I began to research these statistics, it was clear to me it was time to start cleansing my lungs in order to combat the toxic environment that we cannot escape, but that we can fight back against. Made with organic and wild cultivated herbs and manufactured in the USA, the new INFOWARS Life Lung Cleanse is here in a convenient spray bottle that can be brought with you throughout any toxic environment. Now available exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.
You are watching the InfoWars Nightly News, which airs 7 p.m. Central at InfoWarsNews.com. And your support is helping us defend liberty worldwide.